Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com with Ask Dave. And what you have asked Dave is, what makes a great Mahler orchestra? The question was, you talked about certain orchestras being able to play Mahler better than other orchestras, and the viewer was curious. What are the qualities that go into a great Mahler orchestra? Well, it's not really too hard to quantify, and so we can do it. We can do it in some detail. First of all, Mahler, you have to keep in mind, was himself a conductor, one of the greatest conductors who ever lived, an enormously experienced conductor. Lots of conductors also composed. But Mahler was a major conductor and a major composer at once. His knowledge and understanding of what the orchestra could do and what he wanted it to do was second to none. He was also a composer who had an absolutely extraordinary feel for orchestral color. And that he was born with. I mean, he had it. He had it from the beginning. If you listen to the original version of Das Klagende Lied, which he wrote when he was like 20 or 21 or something, it's already an amazing feat of orchestration. It really is. And his type of orchestration was very specific. You know, for all that he was a great conductor of German music and he admired Wagner to death and all of that stuff, he was not that kind of writer for the orchestra at all. His orchestration was always far more focused on what I always call the Italian side of things. That is, it was clean and clear, and it depended on undifferentiated timbres, undifferentiated and highly differentiated, pardon me, not undifferentiated, highly differentiated timbres between each orchestral section. So the first thing a Mahler orchestra has to be able to do is play with a transparency and unblended kind of sonority. Each section of the orchestra has to have its own character because he's going to exploit that character throughout every symphony and work that he wrote. Many of his symphonies are not so much compositions for massive clumps of instruments. I mean, they all are, but those instruments are used in a very soloistic and virtuosic way. Much more so even than in Richard Strauss's pieces, for example, where he uses everything all the time. It's all a big sort of contrapuntal jumble, and the strings are always prominent, almost always on top in a Strauss orchestral tutti. Whereas, Strauss's rule to conductors was never look encouragingly at the brass. And he wrote insane brass parts, as we know. Mahler was not that way. Mahler let you look encouragingly at the brass. He really did. He liked to encourage the woodwinds. He had the woodwinds playing with their bells up to blast at the audience. He used percussion in a completely soloistic and virtuosic way, in a way that had never been done before, as part of the actual ongoing musical discourse, not as mere decoration, but as in a musical way. And so Mahler's orchestras need to have virtuoso players in every section, and every section has to have its own character. And when they play together, yes, of course, you're going to get like an enormous sound. That goes without saying. But it's still going to be a relatively unblended sound. There's usually some predominant color that has to be able to come out. It can't just be an orgy of strings and horns, as you hear in Strauss and Wagner and those people as often as not. The late 19th century German sound. That was not Mahler's sound. So that's one major qualification. Now, there were 4 orchestras that are great Mahler orchestras that understood his music, that played his music either under him or while he was alive, that had the necessary qualifications for whatever reason. Maybe it was their relationship with him. Maybe it was just the way that they evolved. But they are, just so you know who they are, the Amsterdam Concertgebouw Orchestra, the Royal Concertgebouw now it's called, the Czech Philharmonic, without a doubt, the New York Philharmonic, without a doubt, and what's the other one? Maybe there were only 3. 1, 2, 3. Maybe there's another one. Oh, it'll come to me. But it was basically those 3 that had the Mahler sound from the beginning. The Berlin Philharmonic, no, particularly not under Karajan. The Vienna Philharmonic, No. Everyone says Mahler wrote for the Vienna Philharmonic. In a sense, he did. It was his orchestra, the one he loved the most. But they had to be forced to play Mahler. They didn't like it, and it was antithetical to the kind of sound that they were trained to produce. Mahler's music. It really was. They have not made a great Mahler cycle in Vienna. There hasn't been. And so if you're looking for the right sound in Mahler symphonies, then you have to go with those orchestras that I mentioned, those three. Those were the big three. There weren't four, there were three. I just made up the fourth. And you'll hear what Mahler intended. It's extremely important when you play Mahler symphonies also. And this is another factor. The nature of his thematic material was broader than virtually anybody else was using in symphonies, either before or since, not since Haydn. Haydn was similar to Mahler in that respect. In other words, he used found objects, found material, things from outside the normal realm of the symphony, programmatic things, but not in the way, for example, that Richard Strauss did. Again, Strauss is a wonderful comparison. In Don Quixote, when he wanted to make sheep, he made the orchestra sound like sheep. When Mahler uses cowbells, in his Sixth Symphony, for example, he's not trying to tell you that those are cows. He's trying to create an atmosphere of, the last vestige of earthly life seen from the top of a mountain. It's a new sound using familiar material from the street. A lot of times Mahler asks for sounds which are deliberately crude. In the scherzo of the Third Symphony, at the recapitulation, he marks it grob, which means coarse, rough. The opening of the scherzo, the first scherzo, the second movement of the Ninth Symphony, the clunky, etwas tapisch und sehr derb, somewhat clumsy and, clunky. He wants a sound. He doesn't want a beautiful sound. That's the point. And so you need an orchestra that is willing to make an unbeautiful sound for the sake of the musical expression. A lot of orchestras are opposed to that. They're trained to make beautiful sounds, and especially if they're trained in the standard German symphonic repertoire, ugly sounds are not supposed to be part of the symphonic tradition. The symphonic tradition is elevated, it's tasteful, it's abstract, it's expressive, of course, it's emotional, but these emotions are pure emotions. Mahler's are not. Mahler is an eclectic. He likes the sound of brass bands. He likes the sound of tavern bands. He likes the sound of honky tonk. In his version of these things. The Seventh Symphony is full of strange screeches and odd sounds, and so the orchestra has to be willing to make those sounds. And a conductor can force an orchestra to do it. He can explain it. He can tell the musicians to do it. But there's so much going on in these symphonies simultaneously. It's very, very difficult for a conductor to point out every single moment. And then you have to, what if they don't do it in performance? You can tell them. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. So the orchestra has to feel comfortable doing it. One of the other things that Mahler's scores are full of, and it's really a remarkable thing. Brahms actually has this too. A lot of composers do, but Mahler in a really odd sort of way, which is he does not use general dynamics. In other words, he doesn't just mark fortissimo and expect everyone to play fortissimo. Each line has its own dynamics in Mahler, quite frequently. And I remember, and it's not just that they have their own dynamics, they have their own dynamics when they're doing weird things. For example, in the Funeral March of the First Symphony, there's a passage, where after the return of the village band music, do 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 do, da 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 dum bum bum, it's doing that thing, and then the orchestra goes down. You have strings playing with the backs of their bows with the wood. A lot of violinists bring extra bows so they don't scrape the varnish off of their expensive, beautiful tort bow. And you've got everyone has a different dynamic. Some people are fortissimo, some people are piano, some people are... There is a tendency within a section for everybody to want to do the same thing. And with Mahler, you have to follow what's on the page. You have to do it even though it sounds wrong, even though the people around you may be doing something very different in terms of dynamics and articulation. And Mahler did that to an extraordinary degree. And again, it's a function of training. It's a function of what you expect in the music. And I know this because I've played these symphonies, and I know how orchestral musicians are trained, and I know what they are inclined to do, especially within a section, especially within a string section, where people follow the leader. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. So you have to have an orchestra that is confident enough in its principal players, and even in the second and third desk players and string sections and whatnot, to follow their own path, to follow their own dynamics and accent and articulation in Mahler. And that is something that orchestras get used to. They get used to when they play enough of it so that they know that that's what they have to do. Now, that is far more common in modern music. As orchestras have become accustomed to playing Second Viennese school music or 20th century music generally, whether it's tonal or not, doesn't really matter. They are far more used to doing that, having that kind of independence of line than they used to be. It's something that orchestras have grown into. It's one of the reasons that Mahler has become so famous and so popular with orchestras today. Orchestras no longer find it difficult or as puzzling. But if you go to like a community orchestra, as I played in, people look at this music and they're like, whoa, that is really strange. It's really unaccountably weird. And Mahler is. He's extraordinarily distinctive. And so the great Mahler orchestras have the following qualities. Let's just sum this up. They have remarkable first desk virtuosity. That is, they have great solo players throughout the orchestra in every section. Every section has to have its own integrity and character. They have to be able to stand out as something completely characteristic, while at the same time being able to participate in the welter of sound in the big loud passages. But more than that, they have to have a transparency top to bottom. They have to be able to listen to each other and play the dynamics and other agogics, if you want to call them that Mahler indicates in his scores, irrespective of what anybody else may be doing. And lastly, and certainly not leastly, they have to be willing to make an ugly sound. They have to be able to capture the tone and timbre of the music that Mahler intends, and which he notates with excruciating detail. He's telling you exactly what he wants you to do. But they have to be willing to do it. They have to be able to do it without having to be told all the time. Because, like I said, there's too much happening too quickly all at once for everybody to have to be told what to do with every single passage. They have to see it and realize it. And there are not many orchestras. Traditionally, there were not many orchestras that could do that, that had that wonderful equality of virtuosity in every section and the ability to simply go with the flow, with Mahler's flow. So that's the answer to your question. I hope that gives you some sense of why Mahler's music is special and why there are certain orchestras that have a natural feel for it, a natural ability that comes out of either experience or their own particular kind of training. And there are others that have difficulty still to this day, and conductors who have difficulty with it for that reason too, because they're not willing to go where Mahler takes them. And that's fine. Not everybody should have to go there. There are plenty of other places you can go. So thank you for your question. Keep on listening, friends. And thanks for joining me. Take care.